Prepare yourself for the shocking reality of 10 merciless weapons that defined Norse warfare, and the truth will astound you completely. The age of Scandinavian raiders is wrapped in legends of unstoppable fighters wearing horns who showed zero mercy in battle. Yet beneath this Hollywood version exists something far more intricate and strategic. Their control over European waters and territories came not from bravery alone, but from a refined and lethal collection of instruments, each perfected through generations of warfare. These fighters weren't merely savage attackers without discipline, but rather calculated strategists and master craftspeople whose armaments became expressions of their determination. They commanded tools created for a singular objective, triumph regardless of consequences. We're diving into their collection to discover that genuine Norse strength originated not from uncontrolled aggression, but from methodical planning and absolute command of their skills. They control elevated terrain here, therefore we need the woodland route for our surrounding assault. Hold until the marker appears at the water's curve. Stay until the conclusion, and you'll discover which instrument, against common assumptions, dominated the combat zones, and why the costliest blade wasn't necessarily the deadliest option. True power lies not in fury, but in precision and skill. Suppose I revealed that the most intimate and adaptable instrument of Norse culture wasn't a blade or chopping tool. I'm discussing the skrammersax, commonly known as the seax, a substantial fighting knife that accompanied every independent Northman. This item exceeded being merely backup armament. The skrammersax served multiple functions, proving equally valuable during conflicts and daily routines. It handled food preparation, wood trimming, and penetrating opponent defenses during tight encounters. Its blade dimensions ranged from compact knife proportions to short sword measurements, extending to 75 centimeters. Galagrim produces quality craftsmanship. The metal maintains sharpness effectively. Unlike costly blades, the seax remained accessible for nearly every fighter. Its straightforward construction with single-edge sharpening demanded less effort and expertise for production. Piece. Yet don't mistake its simplicity for weakness. Under expert handling, it became fearsome weaponry. The skrammersax traveled in leather housing positioned sideways at the belt's rear section. This arrangement enabled rapid extraction using either arm, which proved vital amid battlefield disorder. It remained constantly available, prepared for immediate deployment. Drive them backward, maintain formation. During confined fighting, when lengthy blades or axes found no space, the seax became primary armament. A piercing strike with such steel could slip through armor connections or reach exposed body regions. Its mass and configuration delivered forceful cutting strikes. This adaptability created such widespread popularity. It symbolized independent status, his essential daily companion and trustworthy defender during violence. Losing your cities meant losing part of your identity. For Norse warriors, this knife extended their arm and willpower. It required less maintenance than swords and proved far more functional during journeys. Whether in forests, aboard vessels, or inside taverns, the skrammersax stayed with its bearer. Within certain wealthy grave sites, archaeologists discovered skrammersax with magnificent decorations embedded with silver and gemstones. This proves even utilitarian objects could demonstrate pride and indicate elevated rank. It remained faithful both during existence and beyond mortality. The premium silver for the premium fighter. Sleep peacefully until the ultimate signal sounds. Unlike other armaments which might belong to families, the seax was deeply individual property. A warrior's blade is his soul-made steel. Sacred runes carrying meaning for the bearer were frequently etched upon its grip. It transcended being mere metal, becoming talisman and companion. Through ash and flame, through wind and life force, may this steel remain faithful. We'd appreciate hearing your thoughts. What's your perspective on such universal weapon philosophy, where one item functions both during warfare and peacetime? Share your thoughts below, and remember to subscribe to Viking Insight. Are you prepared to discover the reality about the most prevalent weapon during Norse times? Contrary to cinema portrayals where every Northman carries enormous axes or swords, the most widespread weapon was the spear. It formed the foundation of any northern military force. Its popularity stemmed from simple economics. It was inexpensive and straightforward to construct. A spear required only an extended wooden pole and relatively minimal metal point. This made it affordable for any independent man obligated to attend war with personal equipment. The home and hearth, may your path be protected. Norse spears measured from 2 to 3 meters in dimension. This permitted maintaining enemies at protected range and functioning effectively within formations. Spear wielders assembled into the legendary shield barrier and created nearly impenetrable obstacles for enemy foot soldiers and mounted troops. Upon the formation, steady yourselves, fighters, for the divine powers, for honor, advance. Spear points arrived in numerous configurations, each created for particular functions. Slender, elongated points were meant to pierce chain armor. Broad leaf-shaped points were constructed to create severe lacerations. The spear was adaptable weaponry. It functioned both for thrusting within formations and for launching. Lightweight throwing spears or javelins were intimidating weapons at battle commencement, capable of reducing enemy numbers even before primary engagement. The spear pole, typically constructed from ash timber, was weaponry itself. It could block strikes, shove, and topple adversaries off their footing. A seasoned fighter utilized the complete length of his instrument, transforming it into lethal control equipment on the battlefield. Observe how the distance protects you. Keep them distant. Now strike the barrier, preserve the gap, manage the tempo. Spear mastery didn't demand identical proficiency levels as sword combat. Fundamental methods could be acquired reasonably swiftly, which enabled training substantial numbers of battle-ready fighters within short periods. This was its tactical advantage. Not that way. Too restricted. Release your higher hand. Move the bottom one backward here for equilibrium. Sense the mass. Despite its straightforwardness, the spear was remarkably efficient under skilled warrior control. It prevented enemies with swords or axes from achieving striking proximity. Spears, not swords, determined outcomes of most conflicts during that period. Historical texts and chronicles frequently portray champions who mastered the spear. Some could launch 2 spears simultaneously, or intercept enemy projectiles mid-flight. This demonstrates even such basic weaponry could become artistic mastery under expert hands. Why do you believe the spear is significantly less celebrated than the sword and axe in modern media despite its actual historical importance? Yet even the spear couldn't match in prestige and lethality to the uncommon and enigmatic weapon we'll examine in the following section. Lifted the blade skyward, its edge keen with symbols, bringing it downward upon the monster with the might of Thor himself. What you've never witnessed is the Atgeir, the most puzzling and debated weapon in Norse collections. Referenced in Icelandic chronicles as the armament of champions and aristocratic fighters, it continues generating debate among scholars. Not one completely verified archaeological example of the Atgeir has been located. The iron pieces suggest royal weaponry, but the timber complicates the dating, creating more mysteries than solutions. Archaeological dig. Was this genuinely an Atgeir, or merely another spear lost through centuries? Based on chronicle descriptions, the Atgeir was a pole weapon variety, something between a spear and halberd. Its designation can be interpreted as spear for assault or penetrating spear. It was weaponry designed for both stabbing and slashing strikes. Most probably the Atgeir had an extended blade resembling a glaive or sword attached to a lengthy pole. This construction allowed powerful slashing strikes to be executed from considerable distance. In one saga, a champion cuts a person completely in half with one Atgeir blow. Unlike regular spears, the Atgeir was weaponry for individual fighting, not battle arrays. It demanded substantial space for movement and exceptional strength and expertise. Mastery of this instrument signified belonging to the military aristocracy. Accuracy is essential. It was costly and scarce weaponry. Only the wealthiest and most aristocratic leaders or their finest fighters could obtain it. In the sagas, the Atgeir is frequently portrayed as individual named weaponry that passed through generations. Thanks to its reach and cutting characteristics, the Atgeir was effective against both foot and cavalry adversaries. It could strike a mounted warrior and slice through enemy infantry arrays. This made its bearer a versatile combatant on the battlefield. Examine the curve here. It corresponds the blueprints for an early Atgeir construction, possibly, but the mass distribution is entirely incorrect. It could simply be a standard spear point. The absence of archaeological discoveries has generated numerous theories. Some propose that Atgeir isn't a particular weapon type, but a general term for any exotic and expensive pole weapon, such as Frankish halberds. Others propose that very limited numbers were produced. This must be authentic, the monarch's personal Atgeir. In the sagas, the Atgeir is weaponry of decisive moments and magnificent accomplishments. Its bearers are consistently exceptional individuals, champions whose identities have entered history. It wasn't merely a tool, but an emblem of their exceptionality and authority. Picture a fighter dominating the battlefield, a blade gleaming on an extended pole in his grasp. His mere presence created fear and respect. The Atgeir was weaponry created to forge legends. It is this enigma and exclusivity that make the Atgeir so compelling. It is a phantom weapon, an emblem of a vanished era of champions whose genuine form may remain mysterious eternally. It represents that aspect of Norse culture that is concealed from us in the fog of time. What if everything you've learned about Norse combat is incomplete? The perception of the Scandinavian fighter is heavily linked with close-quarters battle, but that's merely partial truth. Bows and arrows fulfilled enormous, though frequently undervalued, functions in their military operations. Norse bows were substantial and potent, frequently constructed from a solitary piece of yew or ash timber. Such a bow could extend 2 meters in dimension, and its draw force demanded serious physical conditioning from the archer. It was extended-range weaponry capable of striking targets at distances up to 200 meters. Arrows were similarly varied, and their points were chosen depending on the target. Wide points with edges were utilized against unprotected adversaries. Slender, faceted armor-penetrating points were constructed to pierce chain armor and helmets. The bow was essential in maritime battles. Before boarding, Norse vessels bombarded each other with arrow storms, attempting to eliminate the enemy's deck defenders. A proficient archer could incapacitate the helmsman or commander of an adversary vessel, even before hand-to-hand fighting commenced. Archers similarly fulfilled critical functions in besieging strongholds and settlements. They suppressed the defenders atop walls, preventing them from accurately targeting the attackers. Blazing arrows wrapped in pitch-soaked fabric were utilized to ignite wooden structures. On the battlefield, archers typically initiated the battle. A discharge of hundreds of arrows could create disorder in the adversary's formations, disrupt their arrangement, and generate openings for the infantry to exploit. Although the Norse didn't utilize archers in such massive quantities as, for instance, the English, they never disregarded this weapon category. Every independent Northman acquired bow usage from childhood. Now, boy, it was fundamentally a hunting instrument necessary for survival. This proficiency was readily transferred to the battlefield. Despite its effectiveness, the bow wasn't regarded as noble weaponry as the sword or axe. In the sagas, champions prefer to determine duel outcomes in hand-to-hand fighting. Nevertheless, archers are consistently referenced in descriptions of major battles. Remarkable, he was interred with his extended bow and the arrow container. They respected him enormously. In certain burials of aristocratic fighters, not only swords and axes are discovered, but additionally expensive bows with quivers filled with arrows. This indicates even leaders and monarchs appreciated and knew how to employ this weapon. The bow was a significant component of their military collection. Why didn't the bow become equally symbolic of the Norse as their axes? In the following section, we'll discuss the weapon that became the genuine signature of the northern fighters. The battle axe was potentially the most democratic and versatile weapon of the Norse. It was in the collection of nearly every fighter from a basic militiaman to an aristocratic guard. Its popularity was attributed to its accessibility and remarkable effectiveness. Unlike the sword, which was expensive and challenging to produce, the axe descended from a standard carpentry instrument. Every farmer possessed an axe for timber chopping or construction. With slight adjustments, it could readily be converted into weaponry. Battle axes had a lighter and thinner head compared to working axes. This permitted quick and precise strikes. The extended handle provided excellent leverage and allowed the user to invest all their power and body mass into the strike. One of the most prevalent types was the so-called bearded axe or skegox. Its blade was prolonged downward, creating a beard. This configuration allowed not only chopping, but additionally hooking the rim of the adversary's barrier to drag it aside and strike. For the divine powers, the axe was a devastating weapon against any armor. A powerful chopping strike could separate a shield, shatter a helmet, or even penetrate chain armor. Even if the armor resisted the strike, the force of the impact caused serious internal injury. In close fighting, the axe could be utilized for more than merely chopping. The rear could be used to stun the adversary, and the bottom end of the handle could be used to execute quick jabs. Under a master's hands, the axe was adaptable weaponry for any proximity in hand-to-hand fighting. Despite its apparent crudeness, the battle axe demanded great proficiency to handle. A fighter had to be able to manage its momentum, execute rapid series of strikes, and return the weapon promptly after a swing. Combat with an axe was like a lethal dance. Axes were frequently decorated just like any other weapon. Their blades could be inlaid with silver or copper, elaborate designs, and runic symbols. This demonstrates how much the Norse valued this simple but formidable weapon. It was the axe, not the sword, that became the emblem of the Norse period in the consciousness of many generations. It embodies their practicality, power, and capacity to transform everyday objects into deadly instruments. A fighter with an axe is the archetypal image of a northern conqueror. Axe, soot-marked and damaged, is the core of our bravery. It reminds us who we are and what we have constructed. There were similarly other more specialized axe types. Some were constructed for throwing, while others had extended handles for combat at distance. This diverse collection permitted them to select the appropriate tool for any combat assignment. Are you prepared for the startling reality about the most fearsome weapon of the Norse? If the ordinary battle axe was a universal soldier, then the broad axe or Danish axe was elite weaponry, the genuine monarch of the battlefield. The mere vision of this massive two-handed axe struck terror into the hearts of adversaries. The broad axe was distinguished by its enormous, wide, crescent-shaped blade. The blade span from top to bottom could extend 30 centimeters. This blade was attached to an extended handle up to 1.5 meters long. It was two-handed weaponry. A fighter armed with a broad axe could not utilize a shield, which made him vulnerable. However, the crushing force of this weapon more than compensated for the absence of protection. The strike of a broad axe was absolutely devastating. It readily sliced through any chain armor, separated any shield, and shattered any helmet. No protection of that period could resist its force. Fighters armed with broad axes were the elite of the military. They were the strongest and most seasoned advisors, such as the housecarls, the personal protection of the Scandinavian monarchs and English rulers. They positioned in the front formations and carved gaps in the adversary's arrangement. The extended handle permitted them to maintain their adversaries at distance and execute powerful strikes. A fighter with a broadsword managed a substantial area around him, which was lethally dangerous to enter. He was like a harvester on the battlefield. Despite its magnitude, the broadsword was surprisingly well balanced. A seasoned fighter could utilize it not only to execute powerful chopping strikes, but additionally to execute quick stabbing strikes with the tip of the blade. It was not merely crude weaponry, but a sophisticated and deadly tool. The psychological impact of the broadaxe was tremendous. The vision of fighters methodically slicing through the adversary's formations with huge gleaming blades had a demoralizing impact. Frequently, the mere existence of a squad with Danish axes could cause the adversary to flee. It was this weapon that became legendary. The chronicles describing the Battle of Hastings state that the English housecarls cut down not only mounted warriors, but additionally their horses with their axes. The broad axes were weapons capable of halting even the assault of heavy knightly cavalry. What must it have been like to confront a fighter armed with such a monstrous weapon? Yet even the most powerful assault is useless if the fighter is not protected. In the following section, we will discuss an item that was simultaneously armor and weapon. A circular shield with vibrant colors and a shining metal boss in the center is equally an integral emblem of a Norse warrior as his axe. Yet it was not merely a passive protection element. Under a skilled fighter's hands, the shield became formidable weaponry. Norse shields were constructed of light timbers such as linden or spruce, and had a diameter of approximately 1 meter. They were not constructed to resist a direct strike from a sword or axe, which would demolish them. Their function was to redirect strikes to the side. The exterior of the shield was frequently covered with leather or fabric, which made it stronger. The edges were reinforced with leather or thin metal bands. In the center was the boss, a metal hemisphere that protected the fighter's arm and served to execute strikes. The Norse warrior held the shield by the grip located behind the boss. This gave him greater maneuverability compared to an elbow hold. He could rapidly move the shield, blocking strikes from different sides, and use it to assault. The boss was utilized to execute direct strikes to the adversary's face or hands. Such a strike could stun or even fracture bones, giving the fighter precious seconds for a decisive assault. The edge of the shield was similarly utilized to execute powerful strikes to the legs or torso. Yet the primary function of the shields was to create the legendary wall of shields. Fighters closed their shields together to form a solid barrier from behind, which they thrust their spears. It was nearly impossible to penetrate such a formation. In the Norse age, the sword was much more than merely weaponry. It was an emblem of status, prosperity, and authority. Only the most aristocratic and wealthy fighters, leaders, jarls, and professional fighters could afford to possess a sword. The reason for this exclusivity was the remarkable cost and complexity of producing a sword. The production of an extended blade from high-quality steel demanded the highest proficiency of a blacksmith and a massive amount of resources. A quality sword cost a fortune comparable to the cost of several cattle or even an entire farm. Norse swords were predominantly one-handed with a broad, straight, double-edged blade. Their construction was primarily intended for chopping strikes. The balance of the sword was shifted towards the point which increased the force of the strike. The pinnacle of blacksmithing was swords produced using Damascus steel technology or pattern welding. The blacksmith twisted and forged together strips of metal with different carbon contents. The result was a blade that combined flexibility and hardness with a beautiful wavy design on its surface. The hilts of swords were genuine works of art. The pommel and guard were frequently made of bronze or silver, decorated with elaborate engravings, darkening, and inlays of precious metals. Ornate sword. The richness of the hilt's decoration was an indication of the bearer's status. This is more than steel, it is your heritage. Protect our community, fulfill your obligation, and may the divine powers guide your hand. A sword was not merely weaponry, but a family treasure. It was transferred from generation to generation, from father to son. Many swords had their personal names and histories steeped in tales of great battles and accomplishments. Mastering the sword demanded many years of training. Fencing was a sophisticated art that included not only strikes, but additionally feints, blocks, and footwork. A sword duel was not merely an exchange of strikes, but an intellectual contest with a deadly outcome. The most renowned and coveted swords were those bearing the Ulfbert mark. These blades produced in the Rhine region were distinguished by the remarkable quality of their steel, which surpassed all other swords of the time. To obtain such a sword was the aspiration of every Norse warrior. In battle, the sword was weaponry of breakthrough and individual accomplishment. A fighter with a sword could slice through a line of spearmen and combat a duel with an adversary leader. However, due to their high cost, swords were never weaponry of mass production. Thus, the Norse sword was the quintessence of their concepts about honor, status, and military courage. It was not merely a tool, but the spirit of a fighter, his pride and heritage. It was weaponry created to forge history. When discussing weapons, we must not overlook protection. Contrary to popular myth, Norse warriors never wore horned helmets. This perception was invented by artists in the 19th century, and has nothing to do with historical reality. A genuine Norse helmet was much more practical. The most prevalent type was a cage helmet or spanghelm assembled from several metal plates riveted together. More durable and expensive was a solid forged helmet with a nose guard, a metal plate that protected the nose and face. The helmet was the most significant protection element, yet like the sword, it was expensive. Therefore, many ordinary fighters went into battle with their heads uncovered or wore simple leather caps. The existence of a metal helmet was already an indication of a certain level of prosperity. The primary type of body armor was chainmail. It was a shirt woven from thousands of small iron rings. Each ring was not simply joined, but riveted, which made the armor incredibly durable. Chainmail provided excellent protection against slashing and cutting strikes. The blade of a sword or axe would slide off the rings without causing any injury. However, it was vulnerable to powerful thrusting strikes from spears or armor-penetrating arrows. Chainmail was prohibitively expensive. It took months of painstaking labor to produce, and only the wealthiest chiefs and monarchs could afford it. For most fighters, such armor was an unattainable aspiration. Finest mail I have ever forged. Lord, it is strong. You have done well, craftsman. A more affordable alternative was lamella or scale armor. It consisted of small metal plates sewn onto a leather or fabric foundation. Such armor was easier to produce, but less flexible than chainmail. The Norse most formidable weapon was not iron and steel, but something that could not be grasped with the hands. It was the terror they instilled in their adversaries long before the battle commenced. They are here. The vessels are coming. Flee, brothers, flee. Their entire culture of warfare was aimed at shattering the adversary's spirit before the first strike was executed. It all commenced with their vessels, the drakars. Picture the coast of a peaceful village on the horizon of which dozens of vessels with striped sails suddenly appear. Their prows are decorated with carved heads of dragons and serpents that seem about to breathe fire. The mere sight of this armada gliding silently across the water paralyzed the will to resist. Drakars were an emblem of inevitable doom, sea monsters carrying death and destruction on their backs. This was the first wave of psychological assault. Then came the assault on the senses. Before landing, the Norse beat drums and blew horns, creating a deafening wild roar. This sound, mixed with their guttural battle cries, was intended to sow panic and chaos among the defenders. The appearance of the fighters themselves was similarly part of this strategy. They were tall, strong individuals with long hair and beards, frequently braided into plaits. Their bodies were covered with tattoos, and they wore bear and wolf pelts on their shoulders. The berserkers occupied a special place in this theater of horror. These fighters, who had dedicated themselves to the god Odin, fell into a sacred battle frenzy. According to the sagas, in this state they felt no pain, howled like wild beasts, and gnawed at the edges of their shields. The sight of a berserker foaming at the mouth and with burning eyes, rushing alone at enemy spears, could break even the most steadfast soldiers. It was unclear how to combat a person who no longer seemed human. He was a living nightmare on the battlefield. We have examined 10 types of weapons that made the Norse masters of the seas and the terror of Europe, from the simple but effective spear, the status emblem of the sword, from the versatile axe to the terrifying drakar. Every element of their collection was constructed and refined to achieve a single goal. This collection was a reflection of their society. Pragmatic, cruel, and remarkably effective. The military culture of the Northerners was not a cult of blind rage, but a cult of proficiency. They valued not only courage, but additionally weapon mastery, tactical knowledge, and the capacity to utilize any resource to achieve victory. It was this combination of strength, intelligence, and a fearsome reputation that allowed them to inscribe their name in history for several centuries. What topics from the Norse period or other historical periods would you like to witness in our next episodes? Share your concepts in the comments, because you are the ones who help us create interesting content. And don't forget to subscribe to Viking Insight, so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past. If you found this valuable, hit that like button for Viking Insight. What story shall we tell next?